Good evening, Tina, and welcome to Design Dialogues hosted by Fablis. This is your host, Bhavya, and today we have the pleasure of speaking with Tina, partner of Conran Partners. Just to give a brief introduction about your studio, Conran Partner is an internationally renowned architecture and interior design practice founded by legendary Sir Terence Conran. With studios in London and Hong Kong, the firm seamlessly blends contemporary design with heritage, culture, and sustainability. Their portfolio spans a diverse range of global projects, from luxury residences to boutique hotels to large-scale urban developments. Known for their holistic approach, the studio creates spaces that are elegant, functional, and deeply connected to their context. So thank you so much for joining us, Tina, today.
Thank you for having me.
So before starting the questions, I would like to inform you that this interview will be published on the website of Fablis. So sign up to the Fablis website and you'll get the access to watch this interview. So shall we proceed with the questions?
Go for it.
Yeah. So the first question, Conran Partner emphasizes style over fashion in design to ensure timeless results. Could you elaborate on how this philosophy shapes the design process, particularly when balancing innovation with longevity in the projects?
Yeah, and I think this is a very kind of important point generally in design, because obviously as designers, particularly in interior design, we are certainly influenced by what's happening in fashion, what's happening, with colors, what's happening in art, etc. So I don't think we can completely close ourselves off of that. But I think what we tend to do is supposed to last for quite a long time. So if we design something that is very much based on today's fashion, a lot of our hotels, for example, take 3, 4, 5 years or even longer to come to fruition. So if it's based on trends from 25, then obviously in 2030, that's not going to be relevant anymore. So what we always try and do is to develop an approach and a concept for each project that is bespoke to the particular project, to the client, to the end user, and that as a result of that is kind of meaningful for the project going forward and into the future. We may then still make decisions to use, particular elements that maybe have a more kind of fashion relevant or, style relevant kind of context, but it's not wholly reliant on what's fashionable right now. It has its strong storyline, and it might be the kind of the little things that can be changed easier in the future that are maybe more kind of relevant to what's happening today.
So moving forward, how did the natural surroundings, particularly the Plover Cove Reservoir, influence the design approach for the Villa Luca, and what specific elements were incorporated to enhance the connection between the villa and its environments?
Villa Luca was a really interesting project because it's located, whilst in Hong Kong, it's located in the New Territories and actually in a very beautiful, actually very natural area. Hong Kong has amazing natural beauty. So people living there want an escape from the city, and that's what we wanted to bring into the design that we did there. That when you're there, you don't feel like you're in an urban house. You actually feel like you're living somewhere that is connected to nature. So one big element, and obviously we didn't design the architecture. The architecture was designed by Olsen Kundig, who we really enjoyed collaborating with. But we wanted to make sure that that focus on looking outside, whether it's on your garden or out onto the reservoir and the nature, is very important. So it's got a fantastic roof terrace. There's a real focus on the view and bringing that kind of into the building. We have a strong access, for example, between kitchen, dining room, and there's a water feature outside. So it's all about that connection between inside and outside. But then also what we wanted to do is use very natural finishes inside. So we used a slate stone, which is it's not like a marble that's very strongly figured, but it's a very natural stone. Used it in a hone finish. A lot of timber. So it feels like a very kind of natural contemporary color palette and materials palette that kind of speaks to that kind of natural feeling and environment. And also overarchingly feels very calm. So we wanted the whole space to feel very kind of calm, elegant, like a proper retreat. And that was really the ambition.
So what role did sustainability play in the design and the material selection for Villa Luca, as you just mentioned? And how did you address the potential trade-offs between sustainability and luxury in this project?
That's obviously one of the very big topics that is going on in our industry at the moment. And, sustainability has to be at everybody's forefront of their mind. We only have one planet and we need to be careful with it. So obviously what I just mentioned is the use of natural materials is obviously one big part of that, such that there's actually a way of them being recycled in the future, reused and brought back into another function. And also trying to not put anything in that doesn't have to be there. That's another way for us to look at sustainability. And importantly, that the finishes and the designs that we bring in have a timelessness about them. If it's something that, and this goes back to our very first question that we talked about, if you have a design that's more timeless and more specific to the project, it will stand the test of time, and people people don't feel like they need to rip it out after 5 years and do something new. So I think that kind of timeless design and using finishes and materials that last for a long period of time, that is a really important part how we as interior designers can bring sustainability in a project. There's always a big debate about it, can we get all of the specified items? What is the cost for it? Because unfortunately, at times there is a higher cost associated with that. So that's always a conversation we need to have with our clients to make sure that, we can address all of those different concerns and make sure that we end up with a result that we can be proud of and that we're happy with.
So, with studios in London and Hong Kong and the project spanning diverse culture and continents, how do you ensure that each design remains sensitive to its local context while reflecting the firm's global ethos?
That's a very good question, and obviously, a very challenging one. I think there is a reason why clients from all over the globe come to designers that are located not in their own country. And I think the interesting thing with that is that, of course, when you're working with someone who is from a country, they have a very deep understanding of the culture, but that can at times, and we find this also working in the UK, that can at times also be restrictive, so there's pros and cons for both of those approaches. And I think as international designers, what we bring to it is maybe like an outside perspective. So we can look at a location, we can look at it at a site, we can look at a city or whatever with an outsider's eye and maybe kind of pick up on very specific things that stand out for us that maybe wouldn't stand out as much as, if we're looking at London, completely different things stand out to us than it might be to you, that you're not based in London. So I think it's that outsider's perspective, so we can put a different lens on the location. We always do a lot of research. It's very important for us to understand our location, understand how people live, understand, the kind of the little sensitivities that might come out of how people live. People in the UK get offended by certain things, people in India get offended by certain things, or they do things a certain way. We want to make sure that we understand that, because we want to make sure that people feel comfortable in our design. So that's a very important thing for us. So we drill down very deeply into that, and then we go into research on the location, research into what architects, what kind of urban designers there, artists that are working in that region. So we really kind of try and understand our context, work very closely with our client and with the consultant team on that, so we can bring a deep understanding into the project, but have that kind of outsider's perspective, if you like.
Amazing. So, talking about project, KEF Music Gallery in London, the brief emphasizes creating a very series of experiential zones. Could you elaborate on how the design fosters curiosity and engagement for both the audiophiles and the newcomers? And were there any challenges in designing spaces that cater to such a diverse type of audience?
I think that's a very good question, and it's very perceptive, because I think audio showrooms are one of those kind of environments that can be very, very off-putting to anyone who's not that knowledgeable. You walk into an audio showroom, you're surrounded by audio nerds, and it's all a bit too much, and it's quite intimidating. So what KEF wanted to do from the very beginning, they have a very design-led approach. So they understand the power of design within that, so also in their environments. So what they wanted to create is a series of environments where you can go as deep or as little as you would like to and feel comfortable with. So the ground floor was very much about everybody come in, there's a cafe, you can just have a coffee, you can just have a look at things. It's a very gentle introduction. There's no forced kind of feeding of anything, and you can engage with it as much as you like. And obviously they do quite a lot of events and things like that there. So you can come to a talk about audio, about music, you can come to a concert. So that's a very soft touch, very open, democratic, open to everyone. Then we have the downstairs area, which is much more kind of an in-depth dive into it. And those environments down there are much more about, you are actually interested in this. You could be a professional, you could be, a buyer, you could know a lot about it, you could not. So again, there's a layering there. So there's spaces that basically look a bit like your living room, if you had a very nice living room. And you can enjoy music in a setting that's very much like what you might have at home. And I think that's very important, because that again makes it very democratic, and you can say, okay, I can see how this could work in my own four walls, and it's very easy to understand. And then we go up in environments that become more sophisticated, all the way to the ultimate experience room, which obviously is not something you would be having at home. Maybe some people do, but most people wouldn't, where it's a whole other layer of kind of experience, and that's really about immersing yourself really deeply into the technical capabilities. But you can enjoy that room and watch a film without knowing much about kind of, audio studio at all. So what we really wanted to do and what Kef wanted to do is get that layering in place such that you can engage as much or as little as you feel comfortable with, and that we have environments that speak to someone who's really into it, but that can also be, something that's enjoyable for people who just want to kind of dabble in, who just enjoy music.
So it's basically like intangible approach towards architecture, how architecture can't be forced, but it's more over an experience for the users, the different type of user-generic design, right?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. You can delve as deeply or as little as you want into the different elements.
So moving ahead with the tangible approach for this project, with the engineered shelving systems and the flexible layouts in the project, it's clear that the future proofing was very much the priority of the project. So how did you strike a balance between creating a timeless design and leaving room for adaptation to evolving technology and user needs?
I mean, we had from the very beginning, we had a little kind of concept that we all talked about, which is to create an exquisite backdrop, is what we kind of called it. So what that really referred to was that with any retail environment, you need flexibility. It's inevitable. You're changing the product all the time. You're wanting to adapt the space, and obviously here, particularly upstairs, all sorts of different functionalities, all sorts of different events happening. So it needed to be adaptable. But what we wanted to do is that what's surrounding that, what's holding all of that, was meant to be very simple, very elegant, engineered to reflect the kind of whole Kent engineering history of Kev, but also something that has its own kind of beauty, but that's not a beauty that kind of stands in your face. So that's really what that was about. So that beautiful concrete poured flooring that we've got, the walls in the render, we've got this amazing it's actually a recycled cardboard that we're using for the soundproofing, which actually looks stunning, I think. So it's a very kind of rough shell, but everything is detailed just so. There's a beautiful kind of metal detail running around the top of this. We've got that kind of ceiling grid inlay. So there's lots and lots of beautiful details, but they don't shout so much. They're very much that exquisite backdrop that we've been talking about that then allows them to overlay all of these different elements and create all of these different scenarios within that.
So with reference to the portfolio of the Conran partners, your projects often have a very strong sense of place and space by the context. How do you strike a balance between creating a design that reflects the local environment in the project and introducing elements that challenge or redefine the project?
Which is very important, actually. You're absolutely right. So, I was talking a little bit earlier about the fact that we do a lot of research on our location, our clients, the end users, how the building will be utilized. And that really forms the backdrop. So that's the point where we, from our research, go back to the client team and say, these are the kind of things we've identified that we think are very much of the local culture, or something that is relevant to people, or might be relevant to people visiting that country to get an idea and understanding of it. And then that's a good point where we have a conversation where our clients can say, actually, that's maybe a little bit too obvious, but this one is definitely something that speaks to us. So we can refine it further and further, and then come up with elements that we all feel kind of really speak of the location, but without being like a Disney park, or, being too kind of specific about that. Obviously, we also don't want to just create something that is a replica of a local design, because that's not what this is about, because we need to make sure that we also bring the kind of modernity into it. We need to bring the contemporary context into it, the people that are using it. What is the aim for that particular location? Is it co-working? Is it a hotel? What experience do we want people to give? So we also always have, and our projects always have, that kind of contemporary angle to it, to make sure that it's relevant to how people live today.
Another relevant project of yours that talks about the experience is the Taj project. So how did you approach balancing the industrial heritage of the site with the modern aspirations of the Taj as a brand? And were there any specific challenges or breakthroughs in this integration process?
Well, that was a fascinating collaboration, because obviously the site with its industrial heritage right next to the amazing mangrove forest, it's a fascinating location. And obviously our client, Godrej, that has been the location of their family business for many, 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 many years. So it has a really strong historic background, and they were very, very keen to make sure that that industrial heritage is retained all the way through. And then, of course, that very kind of long-standing family collaborating with Taj, which is also obviously a very long-standing, very influential Indian family with its own values, that was a really interesting marriage, because obviously when you look at Taj, the Taj main brand, they're very much about those beautiful, luxurious environments, palace hotels, the Taj Mahal, they have that very, very strong aesthetic, which is really not industrial. It's very, very different. So it was a very interesting conversation that we've had, and I think it required a lot of openness on behalf of both clients there, Taj and of course Godrej, to find a marriage between those two and create something that Godrej felt reflected their heritage and their aspirations to be very contemporary and very clean and very modern, but still making sure that it feels like a Taj, and it kind of brings the heritage of that into it. Obviously, a lot of it with Taj is about the level of service. It's about creating that experience, which is not necessarily tied to how it specifically looks, but it's also a lot about the kind of service and how guests are being embraced. But I think just at the time, Mr. Chatwal came in as the CEO of IHCL, so we had a presentation to him, and I think he really could see that going into the future of the Taj brand, to have something that's very contemporary can actually add something else to the portfolio, and could be a way of kind of seeing how Taj may kind of develop into the future. So I think it was a really interesting collaboration where lots of different things kind of came together and hopefully ended up with a beautiful result.
So just another question, a short question off the desk about this project. So did you get a chance to visit India while working on this project?
Absolutely, yes. Unfortunately, of course, a lot of the time was during COVID, so that was really bad timing. Well, I mean, it's bad timing for the whole world, but we started the project before. So we probably had about a year or so working on the design with the architect and the landscaping architect, and of course the Godrej in-house design team. We worked with them for probably about a year or so before COVID hit. So we actually had a series of meetings in Mumbai at the time. So it was great to actually get together, see the site, and really have that kind of one-to-one. And then when it went online, it made that a little bit easier because we'd already met each other. We'd been to site, we'd experienced, Mumbai and, fantastic city and all of that kind of stuff. And then, of course, once COVID had finished, the project was nearly completed, and the Godrej on-site team did a fantastic job of looking after it. So Studio Crowley looked after it during that period. But then we were able to visit before it completed on site. So we could have a little bit of input still at the end of it and make sure it's all kind of done as we wanted. But they did an amazing job in guarding it and looking after it.
Of course, of course. So did you have any chance to have an Indian food or something like that? Like the basic
Absolutely.
cuisine?
And what was very interesting about that is, when you have India, of course, we have a lot of Indian restaurants in London, right? I mean, it's such a
Okay,
strong cultural influence here, but it's
okay.
different. The food is very anglicized, and you realize that when you come to India, that actually the food is really quite different. And I personally, I prefer it, to be honest. We had some fantastic foods in Mumbai, both in contemporary restaurants and more, more traditional restaurants. But, I really enjoy the Indian cuisine. So I'm looking forward to coming back and trying more.
Of course, definitely you should come back because we have around more than 20 states in India. So we have at least 50 different cuisines in India. So you should definitely try it all. I hope you'll love it.
Yes, absolutely. From what I've seen so far, most definitely.
Yeah. So coming back to the questions, you've emphasized celebrating the local craftsmanship and the intricate details in this project. Could you share how specific examples of how traditional techniques or materials were incorporated into the design, particularly in the guest rooms or the public spaces?
I mean, there's a couple of things to note actually of very, very different types. One is that in the guest rooms in particular, you will have seen the photographs. There's a beautiful tapestry above the bed, and that was very much a collaboration with local weaving collectives. So they were all kind of handmade locally, working together with the crafts women mostly, who wove those and who produced those beautiful tapestries. So that was a really nice example. So from the beginning, we knew that we wanted something that has a contemporary feel, but it's very much kind of about the location, and that really brought that kind of mangrove forest and the tactility and the Indian craftsmanship into it. There's another interesting one, which is actually downstairs, that there's a big kind of metal artwork that you may have seen that kind of goes floor to ceiling in the lobby. That was actually not done by an Indian artist. That was actually done by a UK-based artist, but based upon, they're called, they actually did loads and loads of research, and they did a lot of footage and investigations in the mangrove forests, and then actually wove all of that into that piece of artwork. So that was almost like a reverse way of kind of doing that, which we enjoyed. But actually, the most important thing is actually the craftsmanship of the workers on site. And I think that's something that's quite particular and unique in India. For example, stonemasonry, carpentry, the metal detailing. There's quite a lot of very intricate details that are very modern, but they rely on craftsmen doing these things really, really well. And I think that's something that is always a joy working in India, that, you have the ability to actually do things that you just couldn't do in Europe because it would just cost way too much because you can't get the craftsmanship. Whereas in India, for example, the floor inlay and the all-day dining, those kind of elements, they're all reliant on local craftsmen and people who can actually build these things.
So, Tina, moving on to the last question for the day. So, how did the Conran partners, as one of the renowned leader in architecture and design, what legacy or long-term impact do you hope your work and the practice leave on the industry and the communities you design for?
Obviously, that's a very big question. And I know that a lot of architects are very much, it's all about legacy. It's all about, getting their ideas into people. But for us, it's really, we enjoy creating environments for people. That's always been our driving force. And really, what we would like to see is that the spaces we create, the buildings we create, the interiors we create are spaces that people enjoy going to, that are valuable to them in their daily life, and that adds something to their everyday existence. It's not about creating that amazing wow moment. Of course, we want to have the wow moments, but it's really about kind of, it's about supporting and enhancing everyday life. And I think if we can achieve that, then we feel that we've
Amazing. So, Tina, that was the last question for the day. Thank you so much for giving your precious time. It was a pleasure to have you here. And don't forget to sign up on the Publish website. Thank you so much, Tina.